underestimated. The crimson sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the mining colony as Sarah Chen wiped the dust from her goggles. 3 months since the Valorians arrived, and every day felt like swallowing ground glass. She stood at the entrance of Shaft 7, watching the ridge where their self-appointed overlords had built their command post. From up there, they looked down on everything, literally and figuratively. "They're at it again," Marcus Webb said, appearing at her shoulder. The former demolitions expert had traded his military uniform for mining gear 2 years ago, seeking peace in the outer colonies. Instead, he'd found a different kind of war. Sarah followed his gaze upward. 6 Valorian officers stood along the ridge's edge, their crystalline armor catching the light like faceted jewels. Even from this distance, she could hear their clicking. Laughter, a sound like breaking glass that their universal translators rendered as cruel mockery. The soft skins think they can extract refined titanium with those primitive tools, one of them said, his voice amplified by their helmet systems. "Look at them, scurrying like insects." Commander Zekthor stood tallest among them, his armor a deeper blue than his subordinates. 3,000 years we have perfected mining across 400 worlds. These humans have barely left their cradle, and they presume to teach us efficiency. More clicking laughter echoed across the valley. Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd designed the extraction systems herself, incorporating innovations that had increased yield by 40%. The Valorians had confiscated her reports without reading them, dismissing human engineering as charmingly inadequate. "Don't let them get to you," Marcus murmured. "That's what they want. I know." But knowing didn't make it easier. Every morning, the Valorians would gather on their ridge. Every morning, they would broadcast their contempt across the colony's comm channels. And every morning, the 300 human workers would endure it, because the alternative was immediate execution. The Valorian Empire didn't negotiate. They occupied. They extracted. They moved on, usually. "Sarah Chen," Zekthor's voice boomed across the valley. "Come, explain to us again how your revolutionary drilling method will improve our operations." She'd made that presentation 6 weeks ago. He'd laughed in her face then, too. Marcus touched her arm. "You don't have to go." "Yes, I do." Sarah started the long walk up the ridge trail. Behind her, she heard the mining crews falling silent. Everyone was watching. The climb took 15 minutes. Her lungs burned in the thin atmosphere. The Valorians had optimized the environmental systems for their physiology, leaving humans gasping. When she reached the command post, Zekthor turned to face her, his helmet's faceplate reflecting her dusty, exhausted image back at her. "Tell them," he said, gesturing to his officers. "Tell them about your clever idea." Sarah had learned to keep her voice steady. "The geological surveys show a layer of titanium-rich ore 30 meters below our current depth. Traditional drilling would take months, but if we use harmonic resonance to fracture the substrate," Zekthor interrupted. Yes, we heard this fantasy before." He looked at his officers. "The soft skin thinks sound waves can mine ore." "Sound waves!" The Valorian officers clicked their laughter. One of them, Sub-Commander Ralvin, stepped forward. "In 3,000 years of mining, we have never seen this technique work. Because it does not work. Your species lacks the fundamental understanding of—" "It's in the old Earth archives," Sarah said quietly. 19th century quarrymen used controlled vibrations to split granite. 22nd century asteroid miners adapted the technique for— Zekthor's armored hand shot out, stopping centimeters from her face. Through his faceplate, she saw his 3 eyes narrow with contempt. "Enough. You bore us with your primitive history." He turned to address the colony below, his voice amplified to carry across every speaker. "Hear this, humans. You are here because we allow it. You breathe because we permit it. Your ideas, your innovations, your pathetic attempts at relevance, all are meaningless before Valorian superiority." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, not anymore. Calculation. "Tomorrow," Zekthor continued, "we increase quotas by 30%. Any shortfall will result in reduced rations. Any complaint will result in immediate airlock exposure. Any rebellion—" He looked directly at Sarah. "Any thought of rebellion will result in the sterilization of this entire colony." The walk back down felt longer than the climb up. Marcus was waiting for her at the bottom, along with Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the colony's chief medical officer, and James Rodriguez, who'd run the machine shop before the occupation. Well, James asked. He's increasing quotas again. Sarah pulled off her goggles. 30%. That's impossible, Yuki said. We're already at maximum efficiency. Unless, she stopped, understanding dawning. He wants us to fail. He wants an excuse, Marcus corrected. They've been here 3 months and haven't found the motherlode of rare earth elements their scouts promised. They're getting pressure from their superiors. They need someone to blame. Sarah nodded slowly. Which means we're running out of time. The four of them stood in silence for a moment, then Marcus said, Did you bring it? Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a data chip. Downloaded it last night from the archived Earth databases. Took some work. The Valorians monitor everything, but they're not looking for historical mining records. They moved deeper into the shaft, away from surveillance. The Valorians were thorough but arrogant. They'd placed monitors at the entrances and in the processing areas, but not in the abandoned sections where humans supposedly couldn't survive long without environmental support. The humans had learned to hold their breath. In the darkness of Shaft 7's lowest level, James activated a small holographic projector. Blue light filled the chamber, displaying schematics and equations that Sarah had spent weeks compiling. This is it, she said. Harmonic resonance mining. The Valorians think it's a joke because their technology never developed this way. They went straight to plasma drilling and gravitational extraction, but we know something they don't. Which is? Yuki asked. Marcus answered, his voice grim. Sound can shatter anything if you find the right frequency. Glass, crystal, stone. He paused. Composite ceramic armor. The implications hung in the air like smoke. You scanned their armor? James asked. Every time they came near the processing facility, Sarah confirmed. The maintenance bots aren't just for cleaning. I reprogrammed 3 of them with spectral analysis suites. She pulled up another hologram. Valorian battle armor is a miracle of engineering. Lightweight, incredibly strong, resistant to energy weapons and kinetic impacts. But it's crystalline in structure, which means it has a resonant frequency, Marcus finished. Hit it with the right sound wave and the molecular bonds destabilize. In theory, Yuki said carefully. Sarah, have you tested this? Not on their armor directly, but I tested it on fragments we found near their landing site. Pieces they'd replaced or discarded. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she manipulated the hologram. At 17.3 kilohertz with a specific harmonic overlay, the crystalline structure begins to fracture. At 19.7 kilohertz, she stopped. It shatters completely. James let out a long breath. How do we generate that kind of focused sound? The mining equipment, Sarah said. The sonic drills we use for preliminary surveying. They're designed to send concentrated sound waves deep into rock. If we recalibrate them, network them together, and focus them on a specific target, we turn our mining colony into a weapon, Marcus said. One the Valorians won't see coming because they've already dismissed the entire concept as primitive nonsense. Can we do it without them noticing? Yuki asked. Sarah nodded. The sonic drills are considered too inefficient for their purposes. They've been sitting idle since the occupation. We tell them we're mothballing equipment doing routine maintenance. They won't care. Until we use it, James said. Until we use it, Sarah agreed. Marcus looked at each of them in turn. You understand what we're talking about here. This isn't just resistance. This is war. If we do this, if we commit to this, the Valorians won't forgive it. Ever. They're not going to forgive us anyway, Yuki said quietly. You heard Zekthor. They're looking for an excuse to kill us all. Then we give them a reason to fear us instead, Sarah said. The hologram cast strange shadows on their faces, making them look older, harder. 3 months ago, they'd been scientists, engineers, healers. The Valorians had turned them into something else, something dangerous. How long do we have? James asked. Sarah pulled up a timeline. If we work in shifts hiding the modifications among routine maintenance, we can have the system ready in 2 weeks. Maybe less if we're lucky. And if they find out before we're ready, then we die. But at least we die trying. Marcus smiled without humor. You know, when I came out here, I thought I was done with this kind of thing. Thought I could just dig rocks and watch sunsets. Sorry to disappoint, Sarah said. Don't be. Marcus's expression hardened. Those bastards up on their ridge laughing at us every morning, telling us we're worthless. threatening our families. He looked at the hologram, at the calculations that could turn sound into a weapon. I'm tired of being mocked. I'm tired of being afraid. So we make them afraid, James said. Yuki nodded. We make them understand what happens when you underestimate humanity. Sarah looked at each of them, seeing the same determination she felt burning in her own chest. Tomorrow we start, quietly, carefully. We have 2 weeks to turn this colony into something the Valorians never expected. She deactivated the hologram, and darkness swallowed them again. But in that darkness, something new was growing. Not hope. Hope was too fragile for what they were planning. This was something harder, something sharper. This was defiance. Above them, on the ridge, the Valorian officers continued their watch, secure in their superiority. They had conquered 400 worlds. They had crushed 1,000 species. They stood in their unbreakable armor and looked down upon the humans with contempt. They had no idea that the soft skins below were no longer cowering. They were calculating, and in 2 weeks, when the harmonic resonance reached its perfect frequency, when the sound waves focused with precision on the crystalline structure of Valorian armor, those officers on the ridge would learn a lesson that would echo across the galaxy. Never mock the species that turn sound into music, because they also know how to turn it into thunder. Resonance Day 3 of the operation, and Sarah's hands still trembled when she worked. Not from fear, from the coffee substitute they were brewing from recycled grain protein. Real coffee had run out 6 weeks into the occupation. She stood in Maintenance Bay 3, her fingers dancing across a sonic drill's control interface. To any observer, she was performing routine calibration. In reality, she was reprogramming the frequency modulator to generate harmonics that shouldn't exist in mining equipment. Sub-Commander Ralvin approaching. Marcus's voice crackled in her earpiece. 30 seconds. Sarah's heart jumped, but her hands stayed steady. She switched screens, pulling up a standard diagnostic panel just as the Valorian officer rounded the corner. Engineer Chen, Ralvin said, his translator rendering his clicks into bored disinterest. You are still maintaining these obsolete devices? Protocol requires all equipment be catalogued and preserved, sir, Sarah said, keeping her eyes down. Subservience had become their armor. Even equipment deemed inefficient by Valorian standards. Ralvin's 3 eyes scanned the bay. Inefficient is generous. Your sonic technology is 1,300 years behind our plasma drills. He moved closer, and Sarah fought the urge to step back. Why do you waste time on this? Orders, sir. Commander Zekthor wants a complete inventory of all colonial assets. It was a lie, but a plausible one. The Valorians loved paperwork almost as much as they loved humiliating humans. Ralvin made a dismissive gesture. Continue your busy work, then. Perhaps it keeps you from more foolish ideas. He paused at the doorway. I heard you studied at the Mars Technical Institute. Top of your class in applied engineering. Sarah's stomach tightened. Yes, sir. Such a waste. Your species shows occasional flashes of cleverness, but you lack the discipline for true innovation. He clicked what might have been amusement, like children playing with tools they do not understand. When he was gone, Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That was close, Marcus said through the comm. How much longer on that unit? 10 minutes. Then I need to sync it with the array network. Sarah's fingers moved across the interface again. How many do we have operational? 17 out of 43. James is working on the southern sector units. Yuki's team is handling the power distribution modifications. Marcus paused. We're ahead of schedule, actually. We'll need to be. I ran the calculations again last night. Sarah pulled up a holographic display checking the frequency harmonics. To guarantee penetration of their armor at that distance, we need at least 35 units networked and synchronized. Anything less and we're just making noise. Then we keep working. Sarah nodded even though Marcus couldn't see her. She returned her attention to the sonic drill, her mind drifting back to something that had been nagging at her for days. Marcus had known too much about acoustic weapons. When she'd first proposed the idea, he'd immediately understood the physics, the targeting requirements, the resonance patterns. That wasn't knowledge you picked up in mining operations. Marcus, she said carefully, when you were in the service, what exactly did you do? Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then, specialized demolitions. 4th Orbital Drop Division. Sarah's hands stilled. The 4th ODD was legendary. They were the ones who dropped onto fortified positions when nothing else worked. The ones who found ways to break the unbreakable. You were a breaker, she said, was being the operative word. That was another life. But you've used acoustic weapons before. Another pause. Once. Mars Rebellion back in 42. Separatists had holed up in a domed city and we couldn't use conventional explosives without killing civilians. So he sighed. We found the resonant frequency of their dome supports. Brought down the reinforcement structure without shattering the dome itself. How many people did you save? 200,000, his voice was flat. And I killed 47 separatists who never saw it coming. Never even knew what hit them until the ceiling started falling. Sarah understood then. That's why you left. That's why I left. Figured I'd done enough killing. A bitter laugh. Universe had other plans. We're not killing, Sarah said. We're surviving. Keep telling yourself that. Maybe it'll even be true. Night on Kepler 442b lasted 18 hours. The Valorians had declared it rest period, which meant humans were confined to their habitation modules, while their overlords enjoyed the climate-controlled comfort of their ridge station. What the Valorians didn't know was that humans had spent generations learning to work in the dark. Sarah moved through Shaft 7 with a dozen others, all of them wearing blackout suits that absorbed light and heat signatures. The Valorian sensors were sophisticated, but they were calibrated for their own technology. Humans were still learning the art of being ghosts. Dr. Tanaka met her at the junction point, where 7 different tunnels connected. We have a problem. Tell me it's solvable. Depends on your definition. Yuki pulled up a holographic medical scan. I've been monitoring the crew's health. The increased work pace, the stress, the reduced rations. We're looking at a 40% decline in physical capacity over the last month. If we push much harder, we don't have a choice, Sarah interrupted. The quota increase starts in 3 days. We need the system operational before then. I know, but you need to know that we're approaching a breaking point. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one. Human bodies have limits, Sarah. So do Valorian helmets. Yuki's expression hardened. I didn't say we should stop. I said you should know the cost. She gestured at the hologram. 3 people collapsed today. James has stress fractures in both hands from the mechanical work. You haven't slept more than 4 hours in a week. And Marcus, what about Marcus? He's having nightmares, bad ones. I gave him something to help, but Yuki shook her head. War leaves scars, especially on people who thought they were done fighting. Sarah looked at the medical data, seeing the toll their resistance was taking. After this is over, if we survive. When we survive, Sarah corrected firmly, we can rest, heal, recover. But right now, we push through. Because the alternative is dying on our knees. Yuki nodded slowly. Then let me tell you what I've discovered about their armor. She pulled up a new hologram, this one showing the molecular structure of Valorian ceramic composite. I've been analyzing those fragments you collected. The crystalline matrix is extraordinary. It distributes kinetic energy across millions of microscopic lattice points, which is why conventional weapons bounce off. But that distribution network requires perfect structural integrity. If you introduce a harmonic frequency that matches the lattice resonance, the entire system destabilizes simultaneously. It's not gradual failure, it's catastrophic cascade collapse. Sarah leaned forward, studying the simulation. How catastrophic? Imagine every molecular bond in the armor trying to vibrate at slightly different frequencies. The internal stresses build up in microseconds. When it goes, Yuki triggered the simulation. The holographic armor held for a moment, then exploded into thousands of fragments. Complete structural failure. Will it hurt them? The Valorians? Probably not severely. The armor's designed to protect against external threats, not internal failure. When it shatters, most of the energy dissipates outward. They'll get cuts, bruises, maybe some concussions from the shockwave. But they'll be vulnerable. Completely. Without their armor, Valorians are actually fairly fragile. Their homeworld has lower gravity and higher oxygen content than most places they conquer. That armor isn't just protection, it's environmental support. Strip it away and they're struggling just to breathe our atmosphere. Sarah felt a cold smile form. So we're not just breaking their armor. We're taking away their superiority. Every advantage they have. Commander Zekthor loves standing on that ridge looking down on us. But without his armor? Yuki's eyes glinted. He'll be the one gasping for breath. Day 8. Sarah was running a final diagnostic on the network synchronization when James found her. "We've got a leak," he said without preamble. Her blood ran cold. "What kind of leak?" "Information. Someone's been accessing files they shouldn't, trying to be clever about it, hiding their tracks, but I caught the trace." James pulled up security logs. "See this? Someone queried the sonic drill specifications 3 times yesterday. Someone who isn't part of our team." "Who?" "That's the problem. The logs are encrypted. Could be a Valorian trying to figure out what we're doing. Could be one of us who's going to sell us out," Sarah finished. "Can you trace it?" "Working on it." "But Sarah, if it is someone from the colony," he didn't finish the thought, "then we have a collaborator." The word tasted like poison. "Someone who thinks turning us in will earn them better treatment." "What do we do?" Sarah's mind raced. They were 8 days into a 14-day timeline. The system was 60% complete. If they were compromised now, it would all be for nothing. "We accelerate," she said. "Push everything up. Can we be ready in 4 days?" James's eyes widened. Maybe. If we work triple shifts and cut some corners, then that's what we do." "And James?" She held his gaze. "Find whoever's snooping, I don't care what it takes, find them." The breakthrough came on day 10, at 3 in the morning by Earth Standard Time. Sarah was alone in the control center they'd built in the deepest part of Shaft 7, running simulations when Marcus burst in. "I found something," he said, breathless. "Something the Valorians don't know about their own armor." He pulled up a hologram showing the crystalline structure. "I was reviewing Yuki's analysis, and I noticed something odd about the resonance pattern. See this?" He highlighted a specific frequency band. "This is where we're targeting, 19.7 kilohertz. It'll shatter the armor, yes, but there's another frequency just below it." "What does it do?" Marcus's grin was wolfish. "It makes their helmets ring like bells before they break. At 18.4 kilohertz, the harmonic creates a sustained oscillation. For about 5 seconds, their helmets will vibrate intensely. The sound will be amplified inside, deafening, disorienting. And then we hit them with 19.7, and their armor explodes. But those 5 seconds?" Marcus's expression was fierce. "Those 5 seconds, they'll know exactly what's happening. They'll hear the sound building, feel their precious armor vibrating, and understand that we're the ones doing it to them." Sarah understood. "We don't just beat them, we make them afraid first. They've been making us afraid for 3 months. Seems only fair to return the favor." She looked at the simulation, watching the 2-stage resonance pattern Marcus had programmed. First the warning tone, building in intensity, then the shattering. "It's perfect," she said. "It's cruel," Marcus corrected. "But then, so are they." Day 12. The system was 90% operational. They'd identified the leak. A young colonist, named David Chen, no relation to Sarah, who'd been promised better rations for his family in exchange for information. They'd quietly isolated him, locked him in a storage module where he couldn't communicate with anyone. After the operation, they'd decide what to do with him. If they survived the operation. Sarah stood in the control center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the status of 38 sonic drills, all networked and synchronized. James had worked miracles with the power distribution. Yuki had calculated the precise targeting vectors. Marcus had programmed the resonance sequences. All that remained was pulling the trigger. "They're gathering on the ridge," Yuki reported, monitoring the surveillance feeds. "Same as every morning. Zekthor and his 6 officers." "Quota review day," Marcus said. "He'll want to announce our failures publicly. Make an example." Sarah pulled up the targeting overlay. The Ridge command post sat perfectly within the convergence zone of all 38 sonic drills. The Valorians had chosen that location because it gave them the best view of the colony. They'd chosen their own killing field. "Are we ready?" Sarah asked. The others nodded. "Then tomorrow morning," Sarah said, "we show the Valorian Empire what happens when you underestimate humanity." She looked at each of them. "We started this as miners and scientists. Tomorrow we become something the galaxy will remember." "What's that?" Yuki asked. Marcus answered, his voice hard as steel. Unbreakable. Above them, unknowing, the Valorian officers prepared for another day of mockery. Another day of standing on their ridge, secure in their armor, laughing at the soft skins below. They had no idea it was the last time they'd ever laugh at anyone. The sound was coming, and with it, thunder. Shattering point dawn broke over Kepler 442b. With the same crimson light that had greeted 3 months of occupation, Sarah Chen stood at her station in the control center, watching the surveillance feeds as the Valorian officers assembled on their ridge. 7 figures in crystalline armor, catching the morning sun like prisms. 7 beings who had spent 90 days teaching humanity what it meant to be powerless. Their education was about to be completed. All units reporting green, James said from his console. Power distribution stable, network synchronization at 99.7%. Targeting locks confirmed, Marcus added. His voice was steady, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. Convergence point established. Margin of error less than 0.3 meters. Yuki checked her medical readouts. Emergency teams standing by. We've got trauma kits distributed to all sectors, just in case this goes sideways. Sarah pulled up the final sequence. 2 stages, exactly as Marcus had programmed. Stage 1, 18.4 kilohertz, sustained for 5 seconds. The warning bell. Stage 2, 19.7 kilohertz, pulsed at 2.3-second intervals. The shattering. Simple, elegant, devastating. They're starting the morning broadcast, Yuki said. Sarah unmuted the colony-wide channel. Commander Zekthor's voice filled the control center, amplified through every speaker in the settlement. Attention, human workers. This is Commander Zekthor of the Valorian Empire. Today marks the implementation of revised quotas. A pause. Your performance over the previous period has been disappointing. We expected better, even from softskins. Clicking laughter from the other officers. Therefore, quotas are increased an additional 15%, effective immediately. Rations will be reduced proportionally until efficiency improves. Another pause. We understand this may seem harsh, but you must understand, we are trying to help you, to elevate you beyond your natural limitations. Sarah's finger hovered over the activation switch. Your species has so much potential, Zekthor continued, his tone almost gentle. But you lack discipline, focus, the strength to push beyond comfort into excellence. This is what the Valorian Empire offers. Sarah pressed the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sonic drills hummed to life. 38 devices scattered across the mining colony, all synchronized to a single purpose. The sound they generated was below human hearing range, a deep vibration that Sarah felt more than heard, like thunder in her bones. But on the ridge, the Valorian officers heard it perfectly. The change was immediate. Zekthor's broadcast cut off mid-word. Through the surveillance feeds, Sarah watched all 7 Valorians freeze, their helmets beginning to vibrate. 4 kilohertz. The resonance frequency that turned their armor into a concert hall. Inside those helmets, Sarah knew, the sound would be deafening. The crystalline structure amplified it, focused it, turned it into a scream that had nowhere to go except into their auditory organs. 5 seconds. That was all stage 1 lasted. 5 seconds for them to understand what was happening. 5 seconds to realize their armor, their perfect, unbreakable armor, had become a prison. 5 seconds to know fear. Through the feed, Sarah saw Zekthor stagger, saw him reach for his helmet trying to tear it off. But Valorian armor didn't come off quickly. It was integrated, molecular bonded, designed to stay on through any combat scenario. The other officers were reacting similarly. One dropped to his knees. Another spun in a circle, disoriented. Sub-Commander Ralvin fell completely, rolling on the ground. The 5 seconds ended. Stage 2 began. 7 kilohertz pulsed at 2.3-second intervals. The first pulse hit, and Zekthor's helmet fractured. Not shattered yet, just fractured. Hairline cracks spreading across the crystalline surface like a spiderweb. The second pulse widened the cracks. Pieces began to flake off, falling around him like glittering snow. The third pulse was the breaking point. Zekthor's helmet exploded. That was the only word for it. One moment it was armor, the next it was 10,000 fragments spraying outward in a perfect sphere. The same thing happened to the other 6 officers. Almost simultaneously, a cascade of catastrophic structural failure that turned their protection into shrapnel. "Cease fire," Sarah said. Marcus killed the sonic array. Silence fell over the colony. A different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of oppression, but the silence of shock. On the ridge, 7 Valorian officers stood or lay in various states of disarray, surrounded by the glittering remains of their helmets. Their faceplates were gone, exposing them to Kepler 442b's atmosphere. And as Yuki had predicted, they were struggling. Valorian physiology was adapted to higher oxygen content and lower gravity. On Kepler 442b, they were like deep-sea fish brought to the surface, functional but gasping. "Weakened, vulnerable, Sarah," Marcus said quietly. "They're reaching for their weapons. First, medical assistance. Dr. Tanaka will provide you with oxygen masks. After that, we talk. You attack us and demand. We negotiate." "No," Sarah said coldly. "You occupied us, starved us, threatened us, mocked us every single morning for 3 months. We simply taught you a lesson about underestimating your enemy. The fact that you're alive to negotiate it all is our mercy. Don't waste it." She nodded to Yuki, who was already gathering medical supplies. "I'm going up there," Yuki said. "If they shoot me." "They won't," Marcus interrupted. "Because they know we'll turn the array back on and finish the job." He looked at Sarah. "Right?" "Right," Sarah confirmed, though her stomach churned at the thought. "But Yuki, take volunteers. Wear the emergency pressure suits, just in case." The walk up the ridge trail felt different this time. Sarah wasn't alone. She had Marcus on one side, James on the other, and Yuki leading a medical team ahead of them. Behind them, hidden in the tunnel entrances, 24 colonists with various improvised weapons stood ready. The Valorians wouldn't try anything. They couldn't. But it felt good to have backup anyway. When they reached the command post, Sarah got her first direct look at the 7 officers without their helmets. Valorians were surprisingly delicate-looking without their armor, tall and thin with 3 large eyes that blinked independently, and skin that shimmered with a faint blue iridescence. Zekthor stood taller than the others, but he was breathing hard, his chest heaving with effort. Yuki's team distributed oxygen masks. The Valorians took them without comment, their pride apparently insufficient to overcome suffocation. "Explain," Zekthor said once he could speak properly. "How soft skins accomplish this?" Sarah smiled without humor. "You dismissed our sonic mining technology as primitive. You never bothered to study it. Why would you? We're just humans. What could we possibly know that the Valorian Empire doesn't?" She pulled out a small holo projector and displayed the resonance calculations. "Turns out we know a lot about sound. We've been studying it for thousands of years. Music, acoustics, sonic engineering. We know how to make cathedrals that amplify a whisper, how to design concert halls with perfect resonance, how to shatter crystal with a singer's voice." "Impossible," Subcommander Ralvin gasped. "Our armor has withstood plasma fire, kinetic bombardment, gravitational shear, all external forces," Marcus interrupted. "You designed your armor to distribute and deflect impacts. You never considered what would happen if someone attacked the structure itself, the molecular lattice. The thing that makes your armor strong also makes it vulnerable. If you know the right frequency, Zek." Thor's 3 eyes focused on Sarah. "You are an engineer." "I am." "You studied Earth history." "I did." "And you found a weapon we had never encountered." It wasn't quite a question. "In 3,000 years of conquest, we have faced energy weapons, kinetic weapons, biological weapons, quantum weapons. Never this. Because you never conquered a species that was still figuring out how to split rocks with hammers when you started your empire," Sarah said. "We took the long road. We learned things you skipped over. And sometimes," she gestured at the shattered helmet fragments littering the ridge, "sometimes the old ways still work." Silence fell over the group. The Valorian officers looked at each other, some unconscious communication passing between them. Finally, Zekthor turned back to Sarah. "What are your terms?" "Simple. The occupation ends today. You take your ships and your weapons and your contempt and you leave. We keep the mining colony, our equipment, and our dignity. The Empire will not accept. The Empire is 300 light years away, Sarah interrupted. You can tell them whatever you want. Tell them the mineral deposits weren't rich enough. Tell them the humans proved too inefficient. Tell them you encountered unexpected technical difficulties. I don't care. But you're leaving, and if we refuse? Sarah pulled out her datapad. Then I activate the sonic array again. And this time I don't stop at your helmets. I keep going until every piece of your armor is dust and you're all lying on this ridge, gasping your last breaths while we watch from the tunnels below. She meant it. They could see it in her eyes. However, she continued, if you leave peacefully, we're willing to share something valuable. What could you possibly offer that we would want? The frequency specifications for your armor's resonance vulnerability. Sarah smiled thinly. You think we're the only ones who'll figure this out? You've conquered 400 worlds. How many of those species are studying your armor right now looking for weaknesses? We found one. Someone else will too, probably sooner rather than later. Zekthor's expression shifted to something that might have been respect or calculation. You would tell us how to fix our own armor? In exchange for peaceful departure and a promise, Kepler 442b becomes neutral territory. No Valorian occupation ever. We mine our own resources, govern ourselves, and you leave us alone. Sarah held his gaze. Plus you spread the word. Humanity is off limits. We're not soft. We're not weak. We're not inferior. We're just different. And difference can be dangerous when you're not expecting it. The Valorian commander looked at his officers, then back at Sarah. The Empire will want to study this phenomenon. They will want to test. They can test it against the specifications we provide. They don't need us for that. Sarah's voice hardened. Those are the terms. Take them or leave them. But decide quickly. Your oxygen masks won't last forever. 6 hours later, the Valorian ships lifted off from Kepler 442b. Sarah stood on the ridge, their ridge now, watching the vessels disappear into the crimson sky. The colony was quiet. Not the oppressed silence they'd lived with for 3 months, but the exhausted silence of survivors. They'll be back, Marcus said beside her. Maybe not Zekthor, maybe not this generation, but eventually the Empire will come back. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But next time they'll remember. They'll remember the colony that shattered their armor with sound. They'll remember the humans who turned their own technology into a weapon. She looked at Marcus. They'll remember that we're not soft. What we did today, Marcus paused. It's going to echo. Other species will hear about this. They'll start looking at their oppressors differently, looking for weaknesses, learning from us. Good, Sarah said. Let it echo. Yuki joined them on the ridge, looking out over the colony. I've been thinking about what we tell Earth, about what happened here. We tell them the truth, Sarah said. We were occupied. We resisted. We won? Is that what this was? Yuki asked quietly. Winning? Because it feels more like we just postponed losing. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But sometimes postponing losing long enough with enough defiance becomes its own kind of victory. She picked up a fragment of Valorian helmet, the crystalline structure still glittering in the sunlight. They came here thinking we were primitives, thinking our technology was obsolete, thinking we had nothing to teach them. She crushed the fragment in her hand and it broke into dust. We taught them to be afraid, and fear is the beginning of respect. James emerged from the tunnel entrance, datapad in hand. I've been reviewing the power consumption logs. You know how much energy we used for that sonic attack? How much? Less than it takes to run the colony's environmental systems for a day. James shook his head in wonder. We beat them with power levels they'd consider negligible, with technology they'd consider primitive, with knowledge they thought was useless. That's the thing about humans, Marcus said. We've spent our entire history being the underdogs, fighting with less, making do with what we have, turning weaknesses into weapons. He looked at the departing ships, now just specks against the stars. The Valorians had 3,000 years to perfect warfare. We had 3,000 years to perfect surviving despite the odds. Sarah thought about that, about Earth's history of warfare, innovation, desperation, and triumph. About all the times humanity had faced extinction and somehow clawed its way back. About the long climb from cave fires to starships and all the lessons learned along the way. You know what the most dangerous thing about humanity is? She said. We remember. We learn, we adapt, and we never ever forget what it's like to be underestimated. She turned from the ridge back toward the colony. Her colony now. Her people. Come on, she said. We have work to do. Real work, mining work. The kind where nobody's mocking us from a ridge. What about the sonic array? Yuki asked. Do we dismantle it? Sarah considered. Leave it. Maintain it. Just in case, she smiled. Besides, we've still got mining to do, and sonic resonance really is an efficient way to extract ore, once we get back to using it properly. They walked down from the ridge together, leaving the shattered fragments of Valorian armor glittering in the sun. Somewhere in the galaxy, word would spread. The humans of Kepler 442b had found a frequency that could shatter crystalline armor, had turned sound into a weapon, had defeated occupiers who'd conquered 400 worlds. The story would change with each telling, would become legend, would become myth, but at its core, the truth would remain. Humanity had been mocked, had been pressed, had been pushed to the breaking point, and instead of breaking, they'd found the frequency that made their enemies shatter instead. On the ridge where Valorian officers once stood in contempt, there was now only silence. And scattered across the ground like fallen stars, the glittering fragments of armor that had been called unbreakable, until someone who understood sound decided to prove otherwise. The humans returned to their work, to their lives, to their world. But they worked differently now. Stood differently. Looked at the stars differently. They'd been called soft-skins, primitives, inefficient, inferior. They'd proven what happened when you underestimated the species that turned sound into music, into language, into civilization. They'd proven that sometimes the old ways, the supposedly primitive ways, were exactly what was needed to bring down an empire's arrogance the Valorians had stood on their ridge and laughed now. Their helmets lay shattered, and across the galaxy, humanity's message was clear. Mock us at your own risk. We know how to make thunder.